Okay, welcome back to Curious Now from the Center for Medical Simulation. I'm Jenny Rudolph, an organizational behavior scholar interested in all the hidden aspects of what makes us do and say what we do. And I am completely delighted this week to be coming to you from the Canberra Region Meta-Debrief Club in Australia. It's not every day that I get to hang out with people who like to reflect on their practice. It's a kind of nerdly activity, and you have to do it to learn why it actually helps you. So, thank you all so much for welcoming me. And Nathan Oliver, I really appreciate the invite to be here.
We are so delighted to be part of this, Jenny. Thank you for coming and being part.
So, guys, I'm going to just start with a little story that I think maybe some of you can relate to. A few years ago, I was teaching with a colleague of mine on a course, and we were moving into a section of a module that I expected to be highly interactive, and we were going to quickly be getting into a situation where participants in our course would be able to watch videos of debriefs and then reflect on them and discuss with us. And my colleague launched into, for some reason, this way, way, way too long lecture, in my humble opinion, that went on for 10 or 12 minutes. It was probably an after lunchtime moment. And my heart rate started accelerating, and I had this feeling of indignation, and I was judging my dear colleague so harshly. I was like, what the bleep are you thinking? A, this is not what we contracted with each other to do. B, you and I both know this is a terrible way to teach. You could just hear the whole judgmental rant going on in my mind. And I love this colleague, but I was really, really judging the colleague very harshly. So later, when I was trying to figure out how could I have a conversation with this person about exploring what was uh, that person thinking, I realized, like, what made me so angry in the first place? Like, why was it such a big deal? And I realized that I had this standard that I was holding, which is like, we're supposed to be good teachers. We're supposed to know that interactive learning is good. And the standard in my mind was interactive, quick dialogue where you present something short or there's a video and then people get to talk is much better than just doing a long lecture. For what it's worth, I believe I was also very triggered because I saw it as a matter of identity. That's not the standard, but my identity was I'm a good teacher. And my identity was our team are good teachers, and we are uh, not meeting that standard. And so that's why I was sort of so triggered. So, what I'm interested in for those of you who might be willing to share is, if any of you have little standards like this or big standards like this that you would be willing to talk about. It could be a little story, it could be just a short comment. We can kind of do some clarification together. But I'd love to hear from any of you about a situation where you found yourself judging and you might have no clue what the standard is. Part of our meta debrief activity today is going to be trying to figure out together what was the standard behind the judgment.
Hi, Jenny, it's Di. I'm the coordinator of the simulation program at ANU Medical School here in Canberra. I find myself getting very judgy when students come late to class. It's happened just recently. You'd think it wouldn't happen on the first day of school when the start time has been very clearly communicated. And I think I get really upset by that because I've put a lot of effort into my presentation that I'm going to provide to them. I've arrived early. I've made sure the audio and the visual are all working. And then students are reeling in 10, 15 minutes into my presentation. I find that really upsetting.
Yeah, Di, thank you so much for getting us started. It's generous and bold of you to lead off. Folks, we're going to be making some guesses and inferences here, maybe that we could check out with Di. But what are people's thoughts about the standard that is hidden behind Di's judgment. She said, I've done a lot of work. And by the way, we can come back to that, Di. I have some thoughts on that particular kind of standard. But I think there's something she's expecting from the learners. I don't know what exactly, but I'm wondering if anybody has any guesses or inferences.
Hi, Jenny. My name's Liz from the University of Canberra. I'm one of the clinical liaison nurses. I work with undergrad nursing students. When you were talking before, I was also thinking about my judgments in terms of students arriving on time. I find it just respect more than anything else. I find it respect for my time, respect for what I've done to get prepared for the class. My judgments about students that write in laptops while I'm talking or engaging in a conversation, I find that very disrespectful. So I think it's the same lines as what Di was talking about.
Okay, so we have an interesting thing going on here, folks, and do feel free to jump in at any time. So, Elizabeth, your judgment is that the student is disrespectful, and Di, your judgment was really a feeling of frustration and not being appreciated to some degree, I think. So ironically, there's, in my opinion, something different between the judgment or the indignation or whatever we feel and the actual standard that has, I'll use a strong word, been violated, or the standard they're flouting by coming late, or the rule that they're flouting by coming late, or the norm that they're flouting by coming late. And it's your personal norm. Yeah, Michelle, what are you thinking?
Hi, Jenny. My name is Michelle Barish. I'm the head of clinical skills at ANU. I think that both things relate to lack of professionalism from the students, and to my mind, and those things upset me as well. And to my mind, what that does is then have a linear line to me then being fearful about them not being professional when they graduate.
Not only are they being unprofessional by being late, but Michelle, you're seeing that as potentially indicative of even greater risk of their being unprofessional clinically or something like that. I want to give just an example of a standard so we can sort of develop a common vocabulary, or at least how I think about it. And then I'm interested in, we can enrich it and change it together. I think when somebody comes late and we dub it unprofessional, that means the standard that we're holding is professional people come on time, or respectful people come on time. The standard is respectful people come on time. The standard is professional people come on time. But maybe I'm missing something from those of you who have shared. If you kind of convert your judgment into a rule like that or something like that, would you enrich it or change what I said in any way? Because those are just my inferences about your judgment.
Hi, Jenny. I'm Annie. I work as a clinical skills coordinator in Sydney for ANU. It's really interesting. I take a bit of a personal stance on this because I have 4 children who are student aged in their 20s and 30s. And I don't know whether for me it's like an eye-rolling moment when they come in late and show disrespect by talking, or whether I just want to tear my hair out because I understand having children like that. It's beyond frustrating on a personal level, and on professional level, then it follows through as well.
Annie, just digging into that a little bit. I'm thinking as a mom, did you notice my proper pronunciation there? As a mom, you may have a slightly different standard. I don't know if you cut your kids more slack, or do you have sort of one standard as Annie the simulationist or Annie the educator, and a separate one as Annie the mom, or are those aligned?
Look, I think they align. It gives me an understanding of the fact that these students do turn up late or are disrespectful with their phones or laptops, but it doesn't make it any more acceptable for the student. And am I harder on the student or my children? Probably the student.
Yeah. Probably guilty as charged myself in that department as well. Josie, did you want to share some thinking?
Thanks, Jenny. Happy to share some thinking, and I'm most definitely still thinking, so stick with me. So I'm
Okay.
Josie Goodger. I'm a pediatrician and pediatric emergency specialist with Canberra Health Services and the curriculum lead for Year 3 of the ANU Medical School. So it was my initial presentation in O Week on Monday that majority of the students were walking in late for, and then some continued to trickle in during Di's presentation. And I had this very interesting moment because I had an experience at 10 past 10, and the start of the day was 8:30 in the morning, where a student walked in at 10 past 10 with their backpack on to join the group. And I hadn't ever done it before, but I found myself in an attempt to not leak or roll my eyes, found myself writing a story for this student in my own head. So I decided that they had a medical appointment that morning and didn't have the contact information for university academics or professional staff as yet, because we've just transitioned to a new learning management system. And that's the reason that they were late. And then it really juxtaposed with another part of my career and professional life, which is as a humanitarian. And I was just reflecting on your words, Jenny, in terms of bringing us back to our references around standards and how our judgments are linked to our standards. And I have a completely different standard and expectation of staff when I am working as a humanitarian, because often then the story that I write for them in my mind when they're sometimes 2, 3, 4 hours late for work is that they have much bigger things happening in their lives, and sometimes their power went out. Sometimes they haven't physically been able to arrive at the workplace. Often we actually have concerns for their safety and well-being and need to find ways to support staff in doing that. And they often take on great personal risk to come and participate in the workplace. So now, having returned to an Australian setting in a very high resource setting, it's interesting that my response to try and stop myself leaking for this student who walked in at 10 past 10 in the morning when the day started at 8:30 in a high resource setting was to write my own story for them in my mind to try and explain their lateness or tardiness.
Thank you, Josie. So I'm just going to share a possible directional change we could make here, and let me check it out with you all. I'd love your input. So I'm hearing Josie's story, and she's cooling down her reaction to this flouting of the standard of coming on time. Professional people come on time was the standard. This person walked in, more than an hour and a half late, or approximately an hour and a half late. And the freight train of emotions that comes crashing and rattling down the track for me when I am sure I know this person is a complete idiot and is violating every professional standard that I think is important, that train can really slow down and my emotions can really cool down when I am able to make an inference, tell a story, as you so beautifully put it, Josie, that gives a good reason for what they did. So the directional change I'm thinking of making in our conversation right now, and I want to check it out with you all, is sort of veering into this subject of how do we manage the freight train of emotions that comes with the judgment and the standard, since Josie's sort of already taken us there. So how do you guys feel about that shift? Does anybody want to stick with standards for a little bit more? We'll certainly talk about them. Or are you happy if we sort of move off to the freight train of emotions? Okay, I got a little heart from Elizabeth Roberts there. Great. Any other thoughts? So let me recap then. We are in the Meta Debrief Club. What I think is very cool about what you all do at the Meta Debrief Club is you reflect on what are your debriefings accomplishing? Maybe what are you thinking and feeling behind those debriefings? How do you tune those up? Love for you to share some more with me about what you actually do. And what we're doing today is we're pivoting the meta-debriefing from the world of simulation and debriefing or other debriefings you might do to IRL, in real life. And we're trying to look at if we see our judgments in real life, and then we notice and we're able to name the standard behind the judgment. And by the way, I think the value of being able to name the standard behind the judgment is often that it brings some coolness, dials down the heat a little bit, dials up the light a little bit as to what is going on here, and gives us some flexibility in how we interrelate with others and how we manage our own emotions. And so now we're kind of moving that meta debrief concept into the emotions that go with the judgments that we make and the standards that have been flouted. And I'd love to hear from you all about a spicy emotion you might have felt in relation to a judgment or a standard that didn't get met. Or maybe there's a situation where somebody like did something beautiful and amazing and it just lifted your heart. And that could be an example of a standard being met and a judgment that was positive and the positive feelings that went with that.
Oh, hello, Jenny. My name is Nathan. I'm the simulation convener at the University of Canberra. And if I could pick up the ball, I'm reflecting on a not so much workplace story, but just one about home life. But I think it might tap into that freight train of emotions and what might follow and how one might think differently about them. And I'm reflecting on, I had a family member move in with into my home for about a year a little while ago, and so there's emotions or positive emotions, all the emotions of having family, extended family coming to stay. He stayed for about a year with us, and he happened to smoke tobacco, which is absolutely fine. You do you. We just had some house rules, and so we had some house rules. We didn't enjoy the smell of cigarette smoke in the house, so we kind of like just absolutely head outside, but just don't smoke in the house. But he'd come from a place where, you know, his norm was to smoke in the home. That's what he'd been doing all of his life, and so it seemed like he kept doing that. And I could, at first it's hard to know. You don't want to jump on somebody. You just might have an aroma in the house and you're like, what's going on? It's not like my children, the way Annie was saying before, that I could just be a dad and say, are you smoking in this house? I couldn't quite do that. There was a bit of social nuance there. But I felt like because we'd set the rules really clearly using meta debriefing and debriefing approaches of being very explicit and saying, this is what we're doing here, setting agreements not to smoke in the house. When I kept getting the sense that this family member was smoking in the house, oh man, the emotions. I was feeling feel really offended almost. Like we set the rules, we set them up. We're both adults. We have an understanding of respecting one another's boundaries. So I set them really nicely. And I don't know. So to be honest, with everybody here in this spicy conversational podcast, I had to sit on it and I stewed on it for probably 2 or 3 weeks and I felt it sort of affecting the general relationship between this family member, even though I didn't share that, until I decided, look, I've got to be a big person. And so we brought it up and he was apologetic. One thing that helped me, I think, with all of these emotions of feeling disrespected, I suppose, was a feeling I was feeling, or a lack of integrity or something that Josie was saying about sort of writing a different story to help, I found helped me. I had to put myself into a pace where I went, okay, well, there could be all kinds of reasons. I might be feeling like you are doing this, I don't know, subversive behavior to disrespect me intentionally, maliciously, twisting your mustache or whatever the villainous thing would be. But actually, maybe you're actually going through some really tough times. Maybe you're just forgetting. Maybe I'm wrong. I'm smelling cigarette smoke. I confronted him about it, and he did admit that he had imbibed in some cigarette smoke inside. He was very apologetic. He knew it was wrong while he was doing it. We try to reestablish those boundaries, and but it made me walk away saying, I've got to be careful with all the secret feelings that I'm letting build up on the inside of me and creating my own negative stories when actually I could have done better in being a bit more gracious and thinking of some other potential storylines that wouldn't make him seem so villainous.
I'm finding myself wanting to hear from all of you, and Melissa, love to hear your thoughts. Part of what's cool about meta debriefing in real life is you start seeing the more elaborate, repeated patterns that you engage in. So there's a judgment that you hold. You might recognize there was a standard. The standard might be, by the way, not only is it that we don't smoke in the house, but it would be if you give your word and you don't keep your word, you're a bad person. So the standard is good people keep their words, or keep their promises. And so that certainly could jack up anybody's reaction to that. But the follow on piece that you're sharing with us, Nathan, is the stories that you're telling yourself. You're wondering about what's going on with him. In social psychology, we call that attributions. We make attributions about the other person. What are their motives? What are their reasons? Good attributions, charitable attributions, nasty attributions. Um, so I'd love to hear, maybe Melissa, you could take us into whatever you were thinking, or anybody else. Like, let's just explore a little bit the playlist that goes on for us underneath the judgment and the standards, and all along, that sort of whole playlist of things that goes on in our minds.
Sure, Jenny. Melissa Watts, I'm the Simulation Director for Clinical Training for Fiona Stanley Fremantle Hospitals Group in Perth in Western Australia. My other hat is as an emergency physician. And I have a real world example that was, I can't say I'm proud of, quite recently, in that I was looking after a patient with a junior doctor, and we had agreed, well, I thought we had agreed to repeat a particular blood test at a certain time to see how a trend of some test results was going. And then I was busy looking after a few other very unwell patients, and I touched base with that particular doctor to ask how the result was. And she was blissfully unaware that she had even needed to do the blood test. And not only that, but didn't appear to be sorry or contrite. And I have to say, like I said before, I'm not proud of it. Instant blinding rage inside. And then relating to what you were talking about from an attribution point of view, I think instinctively went to negative things. Oh, she doesn't care. She wasn't listening to our conversation. She clearly doesn't have her head in the game. And then after that, instant shame for feeling those emotions as well. And instantly jumping to negative reasons for why she wasn't meeting what I assume at the time was my standard of good doctors diligently follow instructions from senior doctors and tell them if there's a problem. And it took me a few seconds and a few deep breaths to overcome those instant feelings. And I'm curious to hear what other strategies people have in the heat of the moment when you're not that proud of your initial response.
Melissa, before we maybe hear a couple of those thoughts, I just want to say thank you so much for sharing that story. I think it's so normal for us to react with rage, blinding rage when somebody does something that is really, really wrong and violates a standard of ours. But I wanted to just highlight another standard implicit in your story, which is either a good consultant or a good doctor who trains other doctors, or a good person. I'm not sure which it is. Maybe you can help us know. Doesn't make unfair attributions about other people. The fact that you felt ashamed of yourself or felt shame for having that very natural reaction suggests to me there's another standard there. And do you have anything to say about that?
Yeah, that's a good point. I hadn't thought of it like that. And I think, yeah, there's probably a standard that I hold.
Marnie Griggs, I'm seeing your hand and would love to hear what you have on your mind.
Hi, I wanted to just go back to Nathan's scenario, if that's okay. And Nathan, because we're friends, I don't mind saying these things, but I'm not an advocate for smoking inside the house. But what occurred to me when you were talking is that that contract felt very one-sided. So in that conversation, I didn't hear the normal Nathan, which would be what's going to work for you as well. And what I was thinking through that was the way we often think about students when they're on placement and they're performing in a certain way, or they've reacted in a certain way. And so or in simulation when they do things, I just saw what you did, and I don't quite understand it. I have some assumptions as to why you did that, but I need to be curious as to why you're doing those things. And that didn't come out in your personal life in that situation when you were retelling it, which is something that I would normally see in Nathan in an educational setting.
Yeah. So let's just follow up on that, Marnie, and everybody. So I think there are certain standards that we hold ourselves to with respect to how we interact. And Marnie, you're saying in terms of judging Nathan Oliver by his actions, generally he's equitable. He shares his point of view. He elicits the other person's point of view. You would say that was a pretty common practice, and probably he has some values or standards that align with that. What I think is really interesting is when we're talking about something that we think is just flat unacceptable. I don't know about you, but I'm not very collaborative. So if it came to smoking in my home, I wouldn't. And your question has gotten me thinking, Marnie. I will say I'm now thinking about, like, what could I possibly do? But my initial going in position would be identical to Nathan's, was like, ain't no way you're smoking in my house, family member. And that's the firm rules. We're not negotiating about that. And I have a standard about that, which is accepted public health, health of my family issues. I don't have to negotiate those. It's my house. It's my damn house. And I don't have to negotiate that. So the standard is I get to dictate that rule. And what you were problematizing there, Marnie, which I thought was fantastic, was like, that's an interesting standard, Nathan Oliver. Or you could say that's an interesting standard, Rudolph. You get to be totally dictatorial when it's a matter of health of your family. Interesting. So there's sort of a meta standard behind the standard.
Well, thank you, Jenny. Thank you, Marnie. Thank you, crew. I think I hadn't actually thought about it from that perspective either, Marnie. And it's very creating lots of insight. I'm still thinking about it as I speak out loud about. It's true. I do know that I really push myself in almost most teaching spaces and personal spaces to to seek the other person's frame and understand what it is that we're thinking and talking about, and how can we have a win-win conversation in many kinds of spaces rather than a hierarchical piece. And so now I'm reflecting. You're right. I wasn't there. I feel like sorry, not sorry. I feel like you're right. Maybe I could have gone in differently. And at the same time, just don't smoke in my house. Like, there's a standard that I want to maintain, and I don't want to negotiate on that particular piece. So you've really got me thinking, Marnie. Yeah, thank you.
Well, I was just thinking that really the don't smoke in my house comes back to show up on time. Basically, it's, we do have these standards, and what's wrong with that?
Right. So what you're saying, Michelle, is show up on time is a accepted professionalism standard. And again, I think standards can be extra strong when there's almost a meta standard behind it. Like, this is not a debatable one. Yeah. Belinda, what are your thoughts about all this?
Yes, I do. My name is Belinda Abbott. I'm one of the nurse lecturers at the University of Canberra. And my story comes in from a different perspective around a cultural perspective. So I'm teaching a class and I have these students in the back of my class and they're not interacting. I cannot see any facial expressions. They're not contributing to any of the questions I'm asking. And then I'm in the back of my head, I'm like, they're being really disrespectful. They're not, are they really engaging in the content that I'm presenting? And I'm like, what can I do in this space? So then I direct questions to them and they're like stunned mullets. They don't respond whatsoever. Anyway, I noticed that there is a mature age student that's of a similar culture that's actually sitting next to these students. And I'm thinking maybe I might need to have a conversation with him, to be a bit of a mentor to support those students through my teaching style. So at the end of the class, all the students left, and I just asked if I could have a chat to this mature age student. And I said, I just want to have a gauge. Would you be able to have a chat with these students around, how I'm presenting? Is it anything to do with the way I'm providing the education and training? And he goes, oh, no, it's nothing to do with you. He goes, from where we come from, we're used to a very didactic way of teaching. We're not actually used to being integrated into the learning. And he goes, that's probably why they're a little bit stunned or they're not feeling confident to actually speak up. So, if I hadn't had that conversation with that mature age student or didn't actually deep dive and reflect on myself in terms of how I was approaching this, it could have gone a different way where I would have been reflecting and thinking, oh, they don't want to learn. Why on earth are they in my class? So yeah, I just thought maybe a cultural perspective or cultural lens also can help in these situations.
Belinda, thank you so much. And this helps us possibly pivot a little bit to why I think this subject of the hidden standards behind our judgments are so valuable to bring into our consciousness. I think some of our most mysterious and sometimes heated disagreements, whether it's in a meeting or a classroom, imagine if you had kind of, I'm sure you wouldn't do this, but walk to the back of the classroom and, cold called them or cold called them from the front or called them out for not participating. And you're appealing to a standard of what it is to be a good student. Speak up, have an opinion, share your point of view, et cetera, et cetera. And they were appealing to a standard of what is it to be a good student. One is quiet, one is respectful, one listens to the expertise of Professor Belinda Abbott. And so those clashing standards, if uninvestigated, can just really lead to a impasse. And so it's beautiful that you deployed that curiosity and also, a second party to unpick that and unstick that. And so what I'd love to do now is sort of open the conversation a little bit to all of you and spread kind of what we're talking about to broader topics that you might be interested in. I think when we assume that the standard we hold is the same as someone else's, that's when we can get into trouble, or when we're not at all curious about what's going on with them. I can imagine there have been many conversations in the Meta Debrief Club about things that help you get unstuck in debriefings. And I'm wondering, if we were to pivot and think about moments of feeling stuck in real life, whether it's being triggered or making judgments, what are the moves that you all have been able to deploy that kind of unstick you? And feel free to share a story again, or love to hear some conversation about things you all have identified in your work together here. So what helps us get unstuck when we're stuck in a clash of judgments or standards or whatever it might be?
I might just return for a moment to my example of students coming late to class. And I have an initial eye-rolling moment, but then I remember that 95% of students came to class on time and they deserve the presentation that I've put all the effort into giving them. So that helps me get unstuck from being frustrated with an individual student, remembering the majority of them have met my standard, and therefore I need to continue to meet the standard that I committed to delivering to them.
Love that. And it also seems to unstick you, Di, from our all too pervasive human negativity bias. Instead of focusing on the 95% of people who are doing the excellent thing, we tend to focus on the 5% who aren't. And you brilliantly extricated yourself from that.
Consciously, yes.
Melissa Watts, what are your thoughts?
I'm interested to hear people's thoughts on time and the role time has to play in terms of your reactions, because I think always important to have at least a few seconds for recognition and recalibration, a few deep breaths. But then, Nathan, I'm really curious for your example where you seem to just like stew on the same issue for was it weeks? And did you feel like that helped you to address the issue, or do you think in retrospect tackling it sooner might have made you feel differently?
Yeah, wow. It was a few weeks, I'll admit it, and it didn't help. I'll admit that too. I think I spiraled around and round and stewed in some negative. There's 100 stories that you could tell, and I was picking up and living in the worst of these, and sort of, it's and I knew that I was doing it too. Like I was trying to be all mature about it, saying I'm sure it's not that, but in the quiet places, in the recesses, I was, no, this is disrespectful. I think I think had my time over, I would have wanted to maintain the standard that we talked about, before, that standard of not smoking in the house for such and such a reason. I think my getting unstuckness would have been strategy in that situation. When I reflect about debriefing and our meta-debrief work too, is often to make the implicit explicit a little bit more, and maybe just speak up a little bit earlier. A little bit of a, hey, family member, I'm sorry, I keep smelling this cigarette smoke in the house, and we've talked about not being a thing. Can you talk to me about what's going on? Is something happening here? And I also really like Josie's. I think Josie's idea about telling different stories, the attribution piece that Jenny was talking about, of stewing in negative attribution, when really a thing that helped me or could help me get unstuck, I think, as I reflect, is maybe allowing a bit more space for maybe it's forgotten. Maybe he's not very well right now. Maybe there could be 100 far more reasonable reasons to help me get unstuck.
I want to just pull together something that Nathan said, the storytelling that Josie did, and then your comment, Melissa, about, time. I think one of the really tricky things when people flout our standards is it often lands on us badly. So it lands on us as disrespectful. It lands on us as doing something to us. Like, are you trying to ruin my patient's life? Melissa might be thinking, or something like that, by the person who doesn't get back to her with the labs or whatever it was. And that makes me think of the difficult conversations team, Sheila Heen, Doug Stone, and I'm forgetting the third person. Idea of the intent impact mismatch. And when the impact on us is bad, then we assume that the intent was also bad. And I think that's, what contributed potentially to your stewing, Nathan. And so one of the things that I try to do with great difficulty for myself is to remember that even if it was a yucky impact on me, it was unlikely to have been in bad intent. The guy who's smoking in your house probably is not doing it to thumb his nose at you. It's some other thing. So let me just wrap up in our last minute or so. I'd love to hear any thoughts you all have, a phrase that works for you that you heard tonight, a takeaway that you have, something that's going to help you with the freight train of emotions when you have a judgment because of a standard that wasn't met? Anything on your mind?
Jenny, just what you said, the intent impact mismatch. It's kind of, I don't know, it's just hit me thinking that just goes along with friendships, with relationships, with student tutor, with my patients in emergency and what they say to me and how that makes me feel, but actually what they meant. My children, my friendships, it's actually very impactful to look at that mismatch of that.
Thank you, Annie. Miriam, I see your text that says an approach each situation as if you had planned it was a phrase that stuck with you. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Thank you, Jenny. My name's Miriam. I'm a nurse lecturer here at UC. This phrase actually came from my meditation teacher, which is a practice I've just come to in the last month or so. I'm a classic catastrophizer and like to think of a million different contingency plans, like to plan for the worst and think that means the worst won't happen. Which I often vilify myself for and see as a negative. But I think this approach has helped with seeing the usefulness in that extra planning. And it just brings a sense of acceptance to situations that I might not have chosen. Obviously, it's a whole lot easier said than done. And some days it's much easier to practice than others. But I'm keen to see how that approach can hopefully feed into teaching, into debriefs, into perhaps even some clinical scenarios.
Wow, Miriam, I'm just thinking, if something really untoward happens and I reframe it as like, I planned it, that might really give me a very, very powerful reframe. That's really interesting. Okay, I believe we have sort of come to the end of our time. I just want to thank you all so much for joining Curious Now tonight. And our workout of the week, for those of you who are listening, is if you find yourself judging, ask yourself, what is the hidden standard behind my judgment? That's our workout of the week.
Jenny, thank you so much, folks. Would you all put your hands together? You already are. Lots of love hearts, lots of round of applauses. Wasn't that really helpful session?
I just wanted to say, I think that even though Jenny's only joining us for one session, Jenny, I think that your approach in this session will permeate through the remainder of our sessions this year. I've just got that feeling. So thank you so much for your time and for joining us.
Oh, don't. We're about to institute the meta debrief club now, so we can watch these things back and just talk about how Jenny previews all this and summarizes so beautifully. There's all these debriefing innate skills that we're just seeing the expert at work. So absolutely, I'll be reflecting on that.
Wow, I'm touched. I appreciate you all from the Meta Debrief Club in Canberra and having me here as a guest and joining Curious Now.